The Mystery of Princess Diana's Death, a decade-long investigation. This channel is part of the History Hit Network. The mystery of how Princess Diana died has fascinated the world for more than a decade. Was she the victim of an accident or something more sinister? This is the question a British jury of 6 women and 5 men must decide the answer to this week. 3 coaches carrying the coroner and his jury went to Paris to visit the Alma Tunnel, the place where the car carrying Princess Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed crashed. It is now 10 years since we first saw these shocking images. The wrecked Mercedes, the mourners who came to pay their respects in Paris, the tragic spectacle of the funeral in London. 10 years on, the British inquest finally opened into the deaths of Diana and Dodi. It will cost some £10 million and last 6 months. From the outset, the coroner has been unusually open, releasing much unseen CCTV footage of Diana's last 12 hours. It's now possible to tell the story of that night frame by frame. The images reveal small details such as Dodi and Diana holding hands for almost 8 minutes before they got into their car. I think the footage that's been released by the coroner is actually very compelling because we get a second-by-second almost take on what was happening to Diana just before she died, and in that way it's quite haunting, commented an observer. Most haunting is what might be the last of Diana's smiles that any camera captured. The coroner produced a list of 20 likely issues that the jury must consider. They range from whether Diana was pregnant to whether Henri Paul was drunk, to the role of the paparazzi, and letters to Diana from Prince Philip. William and Harry have said they want the inquest to be transparent and to be as quick as possible. Well, I think if by transparent they mean thorough, there's no doubt that the coroner intends to be thorough. We've seen that already. And as for speed, I think it would be a shame if thoroughness was sacrificed for speed. I think that we've waited this long for it. It might as well take as long as it has to take, particularly if at the end enough people are satisfied that it has reached the truth. 2 years after the crash, the French inquiry headed by Judge Hervé Stephan blamed the driver of the Mercedes, Henri Paul, and said he was drunk. In Britain, a coroner was appointed but died before he started the inquest. The second coroner asked Britain's most senior policeman, Lord Stevens, to investigate. In December 2006, he reported on the evidence available. There was no conspiracy to murder any occupants of that car, he stated. A few weeks after the report, the second coroner resigned. A third coroner, Lady Butler-Sloss, was then appointed, but as a family court judge she had a problem with the process. And there was a suggestion at the outset that Lady Butler-Sloss was not going to have jurors, and she was not going to hear it in public. Now that would have been appalling, I think, and that would have added to the conspiracy theories. When the Court of Appeal insisted on a jury, Lady Butler-Sloss resigned, saying she did not have the necessary experience of working with juries. Last week, the fourth coroner, Lord Justice Scott Baker, finally opened the inquest, legally required when any British citizen dies abroad in unusual circumstances. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, remains convinced of foul play. I am sad then what happened to them. I know they've been murdered, and I am sure the jury of ordinary people will confirm all my doubts for the last 10 years which I've been fighting to find justice for my son and princess. Others are more skeptical. You have to ask yourself, why are we having this inquest? The only reason we're having it is because Al-Fayed is rich and he's been able to manipulate the British legal system, which is one of the fairest in the world. He's been able to manipulate it to his own ends to bring this circus to town. 80 would-be jurors were summoned to the Royal Courts of Justice in London and presented with a questionnaire. They were asked, are you associated with the royal family, the Al-Fayed family, or the Spencer family? Have you been employed by MI5 or MI6? Have you been involved with investigating or reporting on the circumstances of the deaths? Of the 80 people who were questioned, 25 were deemed eligible to serve and asked to return on Tuesday. So 55 were disqualified because they were related to those involved, worked for MI5 or MI6, or had definite views about the case. In Court 72, Lord Justice Scott Baker began dramatically. "You will be in the public eye as no inquest jury has ever been before. We all will. But you must not let that deter you from approaching the facts dispassionately, disregarding anything you hear or have heard outside this courtroom." Catherine Whitty, who was Sky's royal correspondent but now works for Mohammed Al-Fayed, was in court on day one. "I think there was a sense that something big was going to happen on that first day. But then the coroner began his opening statement and you could have heard a pin drop because this wasn't just a brief outline of uncontested facts. He went straight into talking about the evidence. He went straight into putting across his point of view quite subtly, but it was definitely there. And I think Mohammed to start with was a little bit surprised, certainly our lawyers were, but it just shows that even on that first day Diana and her phenomenon and the process around this still has the power to surprise. The coroner spoke about a conversation that happened between Frank Klein, who's the general manager of the Ritz Hotel, and Mohammed Al-Fayed only a few moments after the crash and when Mohammed first found out about the news. And he alluded to the fact that Mohammed then referred to it as murder, and the coroner's own opinion on that was, well, how did he know it was murder just a few moments afterwards? The key images were captured on 31 of the 43 CCTV cameras in Al-Fayed's Ritz Hotel in the center of Paris. So what do we see? We see Diana and Dodi going into a lift. She appears to be fairly happy. Why not? No one's disputing they're not in a relationship. It's what people in a relationship normally do. So they're believing that everything has been arranged. They're going to the back of the hotel to leave to go to Dodi's apartment. They have no idea that minutes later, of course, they're going to be dead. Of the 20 likely issues the inquest must consider, one has dominated all others: whether Henri Paul's ability to drive was impaired through drink or drugs. Good evening. The Paris prosecutor's office disclosed today that the driver of the car in which Princess Diana was fatally injured had an illegal blood alcohol level. He's said to be more than 3 times over the French limit and twice the British one. One of the most intriguing images was shown 4 years ago on Channel 5. At 11 minutes past 11, Henri Paul, supposedly 3 times over the French limit, manages to tie both shoelaces. He squats, switches his balance from right to left foot before standing up unaided. He looked pretty sober to me, and I think to everybody who was watching that footage. So he certainly didn't look like somebody who was intoxicated, and most definitely he didn't look like somebody who was as drunk as a pig, as the newspapers reported in the aftermath of that crash. Lord Stephen's report said Henri Paul was walking around the hotel, apparently functioning normally, with no indication he was unsteady. But his verdict was that blood samples that were from Henri Paul did have a high alcohol content. If the jury are not convinced Henri Paul was too drunk to drive, they will challenge all previous judgments. The coroner has already alerted them to what is called a major issue: whether evidence has been fabricated to suggest Henri Paul was drunk when he was not. In the Diana inquest, one of the 20 issues the coroner has highlighted is whether, and if so in what circumstances, the Princess of Wales feared for her life. In 1996, in a letter to her butler, Princess Diana expressed the fear that she would die in a car crash and it wouldn't be an accident. "I am sitting here at my desk today in October longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head up high. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. Charles is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury." And at the inquest, the coroner read out a note of a conversation Diana had in 1995 with her solicitor, the late Lord Mishkin. "I told HRH that if she really believed her life was being threatened, security measures including relating to her car must be increased. I frankly could not believe that what I was hearing could be credible as to this alleged conspiracy, and sought a private word with Commander Jeffson who, surprisingly, said he himself half believed in the accuracy of what HRH had said. It gives you some idea, actually, of how sane she was if I tell you that she reacted to some of the rumors that were started about her own mental health with humor. I can remember going to a fundraising lunch that she was speaking at and picking up something that had been in that morning's headlines. She said, "I hope that I'll be allowed to get to the end of my speech before the men in white coats come to take me away." This, of course, produced lots of laughter. I can honestly say, as somebody that worked with Diana for as long as I did, and prior to that I worked with her 2 young sons, I saw Diana as a very level-headed individual working under extreme difficulties, not least of all because of the public life that she was leading, but also within the framework of a very unhappy marriage. I never saw any evidence of somebody that was unstable, mad, or paranoid. By July 1997, Diana was out of her unhappy marriage and living a single life. Mohammed Al-Fayed invited Diana and her sons to Saint-Tropez in southern France. It was here that her romance with Dodi started. 3 weeks later, Diana went back without her children to join the Al-Fayed family on their £12 million yacht, the Jonnacle. The cruise made Diana and Dodi's new relationship very public. The couple gave great headlines. Princess of the Paradox, Diana yo-yoed between posing for stills and pleading for privacy. On Saturday, the 30th of August, Diana, Dodi, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones left the Jonnacle and arrived at Olbia Airport in Sardinia. There they boarded a private plane. It took off for Paris, where they were met at the small Bourget airport by paparazzi. One was Fabrice Chassery. His pictures caught a moment in history, the first time the 4 people who would drive in the doomed Mercedes ever met. Dodi was close to Henri Paul, deputy head of security at the Ritz. Henri Paul was a man with a complicated past, and that prompts another of the coroner's key issues for the inquest: whether the British or any other security services had any involvement in the collision. Henri Paul's closest friend told the Stevens Inquiry that Paul was never paid by the security services, but he did liaise with them. It was consistent with what he told us in 2003. Lord Stevens said that one of the French secret services confirmed that Paul was known to them and specifically tasked with inquiries in hotel circles. But as for MI6, we spent 3 weeks mainly in MI6, looking at the records, being allowed to go where we wanted to go and examining all of their records in a way that's never been allowed before in this country. We found no trace of information coming from Henri Paul. We also found no trace in terms of anything that would add and give evidence which would aid the theory of conspiracy to murder and those organizations being involved in that. On the Saturday, Henri Paul accompanied Diana and Dodi as they visited the Villa Windsor just outside Paris. It had been owned by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Now it belonged to the Al-Fayeds. I think she was aware that she was a potential Duchess of Windsor, a sort of loose cannon who they were going to watch very carefully, and she was not averse to upsetting them. And I think she enjoyed how much the affair with Dodi would upset everybody back at Buckingham Palace, as indeed it did. And a bit of in-your-faceness was in her nature. Diana and Dodi then went to another of Al-Fayed's magnificent properties in Paris, the Ritz Hotel. Newly released footage of events recorded here give a remarkable insight into the couple's last hours. At 4:35, they walked through the lobby. Behind them is Trevor Rees-Jones. A minute later, Diana and Dodi come out of the service lift and go to the best suite in the Ritz, the Imperial. 10 years ago, one night here cost £5,000. At 5:40, Dodi leaves the hotel. Henri Paul opens the door to a Ritz car for him. Then Dodi is driven to Repassi, one of the smartest jewelers in Paris, just the other side of the Place Vendôme. What follows highlights 2 key issues for the inquest: the circumstances relating to the purchase of the ring, and whether the Princess of Wales and Dodi Al-Fayed were about to announce their engagement. Dodi spends 7.5 minutes in Rapasi, then comes back to the hotel with a brochure. He heads upstairs to Diana in the Imperial Suite. Dodi dispatches one of the hotel managers, Claude Roulette, to Rapasi. He's marked by the red spot. He returns to the Ritz with a bag. Inside are 2 rings. He takes them upstairs to Dodi in the Imperial Suite and claims Dodi chooses a gold band, part of the Dis-moi oui or Say Yes to Me range, valued at £130,000. Roulette is seen putting the ring in the Ritz safety deposit box and signing for it. There is a debate as to whether it was really an engagement ring, and there's also debate about the jeweler Albert Rapasi's version of events when questioned by Lord Stephen's inquiry team. All matters for the jury to consider. Just before 7 o'clock, Dodi and Diana leave the hotel. Henri Paul sees the car off at the rear exit and then goes off duty for the weekend, or so he thinks. Neither the French police nor Lord Stevens nor MI6 nor the French Secret Services have managed in more than 10 years to solve one of the coroner's other key issues. Henri Paul's movements between 7 and 10 p.m. on 30th of August 1997. Meanwhile, Dodi and Diana went to Dodi's apartment at 1 Rue Arsène Housset near the Champs-Élysées. They drank champagne. Dodi booked a table at a smart Parisian restaurant for 9:30, but at 9:40 he cancelled because there was a large crowd outside. So they decided to return to the Ritz for dinner where he said he'd be able to relax. The CCTV says they came into the Ritz at about 10 to 10. Dodi appears to look tense as it was said the presence of the paparazzi had bothered him. Because the couple have come back unexpectedly, Henri Paul is suddenly summoned back and arrives in his Mini outside the hotel. There's a red dot here to mark him out. This outside camera said it's 9 minutes past 10. When he walks in, the inside camera says it's 7 minutes past 10. There are small discrepancies in all the camera timings. The CCTV footage has actually shown so much, and one of the interesting points that was shown was when Henri Paul returned to the hotel, we see him very quickly walking in with this air of authority, which he did have, and he goes to the bar. I mean, he's been called back, we don't know exactly by who, but now he's back at work. Before that he was off duty doing what we don't know. We have that 2-3 hour period we don't know exactly where he went. At 10:20, Dodi is seen talking to duty night manager Thierry Rocher. He later said Dodi outlined a plan to leave the hotel and get back to his apartment. The plan was confidential, but Henri Paul was one of the few who could be told. 5 minutes later, Thierry Rocher is talking with Henri Paul and another member of staff. Paul then waves to the chauffeur who had driven Dodi and Diana back to the hotel. 6 minutes later, Henri Paul speaks to one of the drivers again. One of the key pointers for me in the release of this CCTV footage has been the role played by Henri Paul, and it seems to me that he has a much stronger place in this organization than either Trevor Rees-Jones or Kes Wingfield. Now there's an answer there. Henri Paul was a seasoned member of the Fayed establishment. He'd been at the Ritz for many, many years, and he was halfway up this sort of hierarchical ladder at the Ritz, and so he had this relationship, he had this contact with Dodi. The 2 security officers, on the other hand, are way down the bottom end, and they're waiting for pieces of information to drop off. At 10:34, Henri Paul makes the first of what will be 5 trips out of the hotel and into the Place Vendôme, where he spends 7 minutes talking with the paparazzi. At 10:43, Henri Paul re-enters the Ritz and goes to the bar to finish his Ricard, an aniseed alcoholic drink, one of 2 he ordered at the Ritz that night. At 11:10, Henri Paul goes out again to the Place Vendôme. He goes to talk to the driver of Dodi's Range Rover. Then he walks towards the paparazzi. Some people begin to gather round him. 2 minutes later, he's back in the hotel. And this is when he realizes his shoelaces have become undone. The cameras show it takes Henri Paul 44 seconds to tie his shoelaces. Visitors mill around and he talks to hotel staff. From here, he will go upstairs to join the bodyguards outside the Imperial Suite where Dodi and Diana are. I was extremely surprised when I saw the bodyguards, Wingfield and Rees-Jones, sitting outside the Imperial Suite, and I was surprised at the amount of activity in the anteroom outside the suite. One reason they were outside the suite was because they were to be briefed on the getaway plan. It was eventually decided to use 2 decoy cars. Kes Wingfield would leave from the front while, to fool the paparazzi, Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana, and Dodi would leave from the back with Henri Paul at the wheel. Henri Paul went down the stairs and out to talk to the paparazzi again. It's now 23 minutes past 11. The plan needs 3 cars. Dodi's Range Rover and 2 identical Mercedes, one at the front, one at the back. The crowd, which is now filling the Place Vendôme and hoping to see Diana, has no clue about all these machinations. This is how one Australian tourist caught it all. At 10 to midnight, Henri Paul makes a 4th trip to the Place Vendôme, where the CCTV spots him standing in front of the large crowd of onlookers and paparazzi. For the coroner, this is the prelude to another key issue, whose decision it was that the Princess of Wales and Dodi Al-Fayed should leave from the rear entrance and that Henri Paul should drive the vehicle. This is what Mohammed Al-Fayed told us 4 years ago. Dodi called me. It was about 12 o'clock. He said, "Just I'm going now to the apartment." And he told me a lot of paparazzi. I don't know what they do, the Place Vendôme is full of people. I told them, "Please, it's so dangerous. Just stay in a hotel. Everything is there. No need for you to go out." He told me, "I think I will follow your advice." Why, after Dodi assured me that he is not going to go out, Henri Paul gone to him at 12 o'clock after Dodi talking to me and convinced him, "No problem, we're going to go from the back entrance, everything is okay, don't worry, I know the way. And please, you know, because you have already prepared everything there." Changed to his mind. But far from changing Dodi's mind, Lord Stevens concluded the decoy car plan had been Dodi's idea all along. Lord Stevens reports that Mohammed Al-Fayed told him that Dodi wanted to go back to his apartment for a romantic reason, to give Diana the engagement ring. The jury will have to sift through this evidence and decide the truth. Just after midnight, outside the front of the Ritz, the crowd are waiting. The decoy driver, seen here with the beard, enters the hotel and passes Henri Paul. At the same time upstairs, the bodyguards check the way Diana and Dodi will leave the hotel by the service lift at the back. Downstairs, Henri. She seemed very relaxed, I think, when she was leaving the imperial suite. As she went down into the lift, she's quite jovial, quite jokey with everyone concerned. No one seemed particularly tense. Kes Wingfield has gone to the decoy cars at the front while Diana, Dodi, Henri Paul, and Trevor Rhys-Jones continue down the corridor towards the service lift. Diana wags a finger at Dodi. She's very playful. Trevor Rhys-Jones is close to Henri Paul and, as he testified to Lord Stevens, he smelt no drink on the driver's breath. He was at work as far as I was concerned, and he was behaving in a very sober way. There's nothing in his air, in the way he was, that should have said to me that he had been drinking alcohol. If Henri Paul was drunk, then he wasn't driving. That's not just a security professionalism thing, that's just common sense at the end of the day. And if that spoiled the atmosphere, then so be it. That's one of those things. I can categorically say that as far as I was concerned, he was stone cold sober. Diana and Dodi and the others now waited at what is the tradesman's exit. For Diana, it's a stark contrast to royal routine and Scotland Yard protection she expected. These decisions to be made for, like men with their little earpieces, expect these decisions and the security to be made like prime ministers, presidents. I've worked with every conceivable head of state in the Western world, and they all take that guidance, that steer from their security. Now on this occasion, it would appear there wasn't the steer, there wasn't this advice. What we see here suggests just how close Diana and Dodi were that night. Diana's right arm is behind her back and their fingers are laced together. At one point, it looks like Dodi is nuzzling her neck. Henri Paul goes out to see if their Mercedes has arrived. He appears to wave at one of the paparazzi. Inside, Diana and Dodi are still holding hands. This lasts for 7 minutes 48 seconds. The princess then mock salutes Henri Paul. You can see her sense of humor in these images, and particularly where staff, servants are concerned. She rightly had a reputation as being somebody who was easy to work with. At 19 minutes past midnight, the Mercedes finally arrives at the back of the Ritz. Henri Paul, Trevor Rhys-Jones, Diana, and Dodi file out to the waiting vehicle. The princess appears to be shielding her eyes. The car moves off. At the front of the hotel, the decoy cars make their move. The paparazzi scramble, realizing they've been fooled. Diana and Dodi, with Henri Paul driving, now have a head start. The chase is on. Princess Diana's final hours were spent in the Ritz Hotel in Paris, many of her last moments captured on video just released by the coroner. At 20 minutes past midnight, the Mercedes with Diana was moving away from the Ritz ahead of the paparazzi. The last thing I remember, we got in a vehicle, we pulled off, and the couple of paparazzi vehicles that were at the back of the hotel started to follow us. The shortest route from the Ritz to Dodi's flat is along the Champs-Élysées. But as the Australian tourist video showed, traffic was heavy that night. At the Place de la Concorde, instead of going up the Champs-Élysées, Henri drives straight on towards the embankment of the Seine. The Mercedes should now exit right before the Alma Tunnel, as the red line shows. Once it goes into the tunnel, the Mercedes is heading away from Dodi's flat. We now know that the speed the Mercedes was traveling at was between 61 and 63 miles an hour. The coroner has said Henri obviously knew Paris, so something caused him to vary the obvious route by going into the tunnel. The question is, why did he go past the exit slip road just before the underpass? Was the Mercedes blocked from exiting the slip road? One issue the coroner has highlighted is whether a Fiat Uno or any other vehicle caused or contributed to the collision. The Paris police found fragments of the rear light of a white Fiat Uno in the tunnel. Had it got in the way of the Mercedes? News reports 18 days after the crash made the link. The Mercedes wing mirror was found at this point with traces of another car's paintwork and shards of a Fiat tail light. The Mercedes was thrown into the right-hand wall, then hurled across into the 13th pillar in the middle of the tunnel. The French police examined 4,668 vehicles but did not find any Fiat Uno which had been damaged in this way. Al-Fayed hired a team of senior retired French policemen, and they claimed to have solved the mystery. In a field, they found this Fiat. Its tail light had just been replaced, and it belonged to a man who had spent the summer photographing Dodi and Diana, James Anson. He was one of the most famous paparazzi in the world. He had a white Fiat Uno, and the inquest has raised as a likely issue whether James Anson was in Paris on the night of the collision. He was the subject of a French television program in 2000. Anson told people he was in the tunnel on the night of the crash. Elizabeth Dard, the widow of one of his friends, told us 5 years ago he had claimed he was at the scene. Lord Stevens spoke to Elizabeth Dard and her daughter Josephine and says they appear to be truthful witnesses who have nothing to gain by fabricating such a conversation. Nevertheless, Lord Stevens does not believe Anson's story and concludes he was not in Paris on the night of the crash. A footnote to all this is that Anson died later in 2000 after setting fire to himself in his own car in a deserted woodland. Lord Stevens added there is no evidence whatsoever that he was murdered. The jury will decide if he played any significant part in the crash. Still photographs released by the inquest offer an insight into what was going on in the Alma Tunnel. At 32 minutes past midnight, Dodi, Al-Fayed, and Henri were already dead. Princess Diana was in a critical condition and being given first aid by Dr. Melis, a French doctor who was driving through the tunnel. The pictures address another likely issue: whether the actions of the paparazzi caused or contributed to the cause of the collision. These still pictures show the paparazzi milling around the tunnel. Although Lord Stevens said some might see their behavior as morally questionable, there was no evidence they did anything wrong. But the first reaction of the French police was to arrest 7 of the paparazzi and keep them in the cells overnight. Many of their photographs were confiscated and were never given back. Though every inquiry has found they didn't contribute to the crash, the role of the paparazzi will be considered by the jury. Another issue for them to consider is whether the Princess of Wales's life would have been saved if she had reached hospital sooner. The ambulance did not go to the nearest hospital but to La Petite-Salpêtrière, still a distance of less than 3 miles. It was 1 hour and 43 minutes after the accident when Diana got to hospital. Every inquiry has rejected suggestions that this was part of a